Well, it's been 2 weeks, and although I didn't plan to talk about the show again, I'm here talking about the show again, which is why I'm not talking about any of the other shows coming out, or basically any other topic. A quick summary of the last video I made puts me somewhere on the fence of Violet Evergarden. It has potential and a premise that I think can be really interesting. I still enjoy the show. For the most part, I'm not entirely bored of the show. I'm still having a lot of fun. I'm critical of the show to the extent of how much love I have for the show. I want it to be so much more, and I can see it being so much more, which is why I want to be critical and talk about Violet Evergarden. With almost half of the show out, I think its basic formula has more or less been shown. But looking at how the show is structured can surprisingly be an interesting base for other shows also of the same format. So despite how much criticism and polarity that Violet Evergarden has, it's really an interesting show to discuss. So today I want to pick at two aspects that I found are important for not only Violet Evergarden, but also other shows of the episodic genre. For me, when a show takes on the reins of being episodic, I expect character development to be a huge driving force of how the show moves. Either the characters learn something new about themselves or the world around them, or we see a different aspect of the character being fleshed out. In other words, the show hinges on being character driven, while optionally having a very loose overarching plot. Shows like Nichijou or Girls Last Tour fall into that looseness. Nichijou mainly focuses on character interactions and dynamics, growing those out in each episode and even giving us conflict and development between characters. For example, the tension between Yuko and Mai in episode 17, when Yuko is trying hard not to play the straight man in all of Mai's antics, and the end of that ultimately strengthening their friendship and reaffirming their bond. Girls Last Tour is also very similar, with each episode exploring the world, or a different aspect of themselves being juxtaposed with the world. As the show's name indicates, we follow Violet as she becomes a doll. Along with Violet are the slew of side characters that inhabit each episode. These characters interact with Violet to form the individual stories of each episode. In some instances, they even take over the episode, which is completely fine. Violet serves as a foil for us to experience the world through her, and so we experience these side characters through her as well, learning about their problems and who they are. Every episode ends with development. The majority of development thus far being those of the side characters. Sometimes they have their problem solved, like with Iris, Luculia, or Charlotte, and other times the development is more subtle and their character arcs are left lingering and open, like with Erika. Erika's story never really ends for me in the same way that the others have. We learn that she's insecure about her being a doll. However, in the same arc, we also have Violet reigniting her dream of being a doll, reminding her of where she came from and what she wants to do. This gives her a little more depth. She has motivations, she's trying to fix herself, and despite condemning Violet at first, sees the similarities between them. Her arc in the show ends on this really hopeful note. But we don't ever see that being actualized. I originally thought that we were heading into an arc, that we were going to see Erika for a while, and then see her off in a more satisfying manner once we see Erika actually go through her development. They kind of throw everything at us in one episode and then move on. There's really no point in watching a show like that for me. It doesn't feel like I've watched much of a story. There's no reward in getting to an end of an arc where the character just straight up tells us what happened and how she's been affected. I don't feel like I've earned the right to feeling some kind of sympathy or hopefulness for these characters. In other words, it doesn't feel real, or it feels way too fabricated, like I'm being put out of the story. Of course, episode 2 had a lot going for Violet as well, establishing simultaneous development for her alongside Erika, and that's really amazing. That balance is really good to have to show off the main character's interactions and how she fits into this world and how she's going to move forward alongside a side character. To be fair, the episode didn't feel like it was completely overwhelmed by Erika or Violet. It had a fair share of both, and if not for the sudden need for the show to wrap up Erika's character, I wouldn't have known it was kind of supposed to be an Erica episode. It could have well been a show not needing such intensive side characters, and just delved directly into Violet and her interactions with the world and her job as a doll. Our side characters don't need to be so extravagant, and if there was a need to have some kind of juxtaposition following Violet, which is the purpose of every side character, have them at least be treated with some care. They could have well made Erica's story one that spanned a few episodes, making it a proper arc. We could have built both Violet and Erica gradually, and then show Erica becoming someone who is worthy of being a doll, while also very subtly learning more about her backstory. There's an inherent problem with show don't tell that I have, and especially when Erica tells the audience in an internal monologue and not Violet. You know, that kind of human moment, that touching discovery that the person who condemned you is actually not as different as you, could have worked wonders for helping Violet develop her own character, and understanding her coworkers and showing off her sympathy, or maybe even empathy. Conversely, if they didn't want Erica to be a major side character, I would have been fine with that too. Just don't wrap her character up with a revelation that felt as if it bookended something. At least for me, that kind of, yeah, I remember the purpose of my life now, ending, kind of deserves a lot more attention. She suddenly became such an interesting and complex character, and I really wanted to see more of that. In a way, almost overshadowing Violet for me. They could have very well made Erica not explain herself, of not really understanding why she had went ahead and defended Violet, and made her story one of self-discovery and of the power of words. Since her story is so closely linked to a blind novelist, that aspect would have been quite interesting to explore in a world-building aspect as well, so they could have killed two birds with one stone. She was just there to be a companion, a side character for Violet, a very interesting side character that was given depth and then thrown out. Thus, she becomes pretty pointless, unless they want to bring her back. But at this point, since we're so far gone from our arc, I'm not sure bringing her back would make any sense. She feels complete, despite still being able to develop further, and that just leaves Violet to be the only one who developed in that episode. But she's kind of a slow grind with how her character is built, and she doesn't even really learn about Erica. Again, she told us about her backstory. So we don't even have that human development until like episode 5 anyway. So why did we have to sacrifice a side character as an excuse for Violet to move about in the world? Either give me less development, or make it stretched between episodes. In Land of the Lustrous, we get Diamond's character arc spanning at least 2 episodes, setting her character's complexities and motivations in the first, and then slowly rounding it off in the second. And even then, Diamond's character isn't completely developed, nor would this be the last time we see her character. Even Cinnabar, the first side character we get, who we learn a great deal of, and we really get to understand her situation, isn't wrapped up in a nice bow and shipped off to all hell. We get enough from Cinnabar that makes us see who she is, and makes us want to see more of her. She sets herself up for being an actual character that begets development, but we don't get all of it, and definitely not in a single episode. These are side characters that juxtapose and even give meaning to the main lead without being too overwhelming, nor without being too unsatisfying when we move on from them. Another crass example would have to be Kekai Sensen, particularly in season 2, when they literally just decided to make every episode a character study. But despite every story ending, I didn't feel unsatisfied. There was development and character building, but they weren't completely rounded off. There was still room to give them more episodes and show them off more. They became complex in their episodes, and once they ended, I was happy with how much I knew, how much was built, and the idea that there was still more to their stories, and that the episode was just one of many that could happen in this world. It wasn't as if their central being was solved, and they tell us about their newfound feelings and motivations by the end of it all. Nothing really gets wrapped up for them, not in a really nice and neat way like Violet Evergarden does. In the way that Violet Evergarden treats their side characters, the development and the point of the stories become really obscured when they're wrapped up and thrown away so suddenly. The characters don't feel like they should have developed, and things move at a pace that doesn't hit at all the depth that could have been achieved. For example, Charlotte's arc in episode 5 seemed so interesting and relates so much to Violet's own character, and yet this huge ordeal is wrapped up in a single episode. That amazing dynamic between Charlotte and Violet just seemed so obscured once they wrapped up her arc like that, especially when the episode had so many moments of Violet being developed or more of a character than usual. For me, there could have been so much more done with that new Violet that we're being introduced to. There was a lack of focus. Focus here is tied to whether the show wants to continue an episodic format or dive down into a more stringent, overarching plot. Each individual episode can either be its own contained medium, devoid of affecting any larger plot, or contain small moments that do contribute to some underlying plot that may or may not be concluded in that season. The focus acts as a companion to the development, tying things together so that some kind of ending or plot can be salvaged among the episodic and nondescript storytelling. If we go back to Nichijou, that would be the storyline with Nano trying to be human and eventually actually going to high school, or Girls Last Tour's journey to reach the top layer, since that's kind of what they're doing throughout the whole show. Another example can be found in Ketkai Sensen's first season. Any episode without White would not be contributing to the finale of the show, whereas any moments with White do contribute. We get White as a recurring character from a very early start that hints at some kind of focus, and we are slowly being opened up to her world and her character. She's not part of the main cast, nor in their sphere of world, so it only makes sense that she's being characterized outside that domain, adding in focus. Much like Cinnabar, who's constantly still lingering in the background despite not always being in episodes. Even as we get these other side characters, we're still grounded in the show and we're still moving forward. We still feel as if a story is happening rather than just moments of development that passes by our head without meaning. We're building towards something. Otherwise, if we have so much side characters, those that don't recur, those that are given so much importance in their own episodes, but apparently disappear forever, the show feels empty. Even if an overarching plot is rendered out completely, intersplicing development across arcs would still give the show focus and allow the show to have some kind of endgame. Otherwise, many episodic shows would end in a way that wastes everybody's time and emotions built up caring for these characters and stories. Even if subtle, focus adds so much to how a show is brought together, to how the episodic fragments can be pieced together to form a tangible whole. Even the most inane slice of life shows do this to sustain itself near the end. Tanaka-kun is Listless ends in a very open-ended way, but still progressed a plot that was beginning to build up between Shirashi and Tanaka that made the show's story not actually be completely meaningless. That in the span of the story, something actually happened and we were following a persistent plot. All of the random moments and episodes came together for this ending that built up this budding relationship between Shirashi and Tanaka and a potential for, another season. Even Flying Witch, which for the most part really had nothing happening, had a circular ending where Chinatsu gets the witch's robe that parallels her fascination with witchcraft that was flooded throughout the entire show. So there was this very gradual build-up where she actually feels like she's a witch now since she gets this robe, and and the show brings it all back from the very first episode when she has this huge moment of discovery. The focus of Violet Evergarden would be the general and his relationship with Violet. He comes back constantly in either memories or in a very brief and unanswered cliffhanger, Violet being named by the general's brother meeting her in a very brief interaction, Claudia telling Catalia about Gilbert being dead, and of course all the times Violet reuses the lines of, "I want to know what my general told me." These are all great ways that the show reminds us of the focus of the plot, and of the very probable endgame of, Violet understanding her emotions, or at least getting somewhere close to that. It's actually really amazing how much the general, who's dead, becomes the focal point. He's almost become this pseudo main character that kind of follows Violet around as if he was a side character, even though he's really not present in the show in that way. But in the same vein, And something that bothers me is that the development of getting from point A to the eventual point B falls flat at times, when Violet doesn't really move with the development. One major step in developing Violet would be episode 5 and 6. In Charlotte's episode 5, she's self-aware of her lack of emotion. She acts out of what seems to be empathy, and there's that very subtle nod back to the focus. All great things, and all things that should occur as Violet is being fleshed out. It's all done in a way to show us that time has moved for Violet. But we don't inhabit that time, nor does any of the previous arcs hint at her getting to the point where she is now. Back in episode 4 with Iris, we get that she's frustrated at being unable to understand emotions. We get that she makes these mistakes and doesn't understand circumstances. But since it ends like that, we don't get the other side of her trying to feel sorry or trying to see why she did things that probably hurt Iris's feelings and were ignorant of her feelings. These kinds of developments would have been nice heading into a more self-aware episode 5 Violet. Otherwise, we really have these moments of focus that aren't expanded on to an extent or feel like we're being rewarded, since Violet doesn't very much understand them herself. I mean, Leon got cut off literally at the pinnacle of that development, where she may have begun to understand what love meant, or at least one kind of love. If they had stretched that arc and let my man Leon actually speak, that would have been such a huge character moment, and it would have felt so satisfying. But nope, let's throw that focus away and tidy this one episode arc up. Let's have Violet say all of these things, be unaffected by them, and move on. That episode was barely about Violet, but they added the focus, and well, they kind of threw that focus out of the window. What's worse is that Violet and Leon are similar characters as well, and could have had so many more moments to really create a dynamic, and then end with Leon getting to where he is now, while also growing Violet and pushing her to understand the general a little more. Without a clear developmental structure, and this really great focus that's being ignored, the show is really sidewinding what it could be. Watching Violet Evergarden for me has been so far a frustrating ordeal. It's a show I really want to like, and I just can't help but see the show as being flawed, with issues of stale and pointless development, and focus that's not really built very well. As a whole, there's so much great material to work with, and every episode is packed with so much going on. It's just way too condensed for me, and despite it maybe being slow for people since it does have that episodic feel, I think it's moving way too fast. But it's a great way to look at how episodic shows are made, and how so many elements of an episodic show actually contribute to something greater, giving shows that otherwise seem to have no real plot actually have some kind of tangible and interesting whole. After having spent so much of my time thinking about Violet Evergarden, I know I probably won't be looking at episodic and slice of life shows the same way. I could be crazy, and having spent so much thought thinking about this to make another video, and maybe somebody else thinks completely differently and they think the development is fine and the focus is fine and everything is fine and dandy. In that case, my craziness is probably a factor that made this video and all of these thoughts, but you know, this is again my opinion, and I really find it interesting to see what other people have to say about the show. So, am I crazy? I'll just leave it at that.